This is Pivot Perspectives with Chris O'Byrne, the show that takes you around the world to share interviews with some of the most successful and relevant people on the planet. Hear their stories and get the most important business lessons they've learned on their road to success, and get exclusive access on how to implement their success into your life and business. Pivot Perspectives is brought to you by the Strategic Advisor Board and your host, Chris O'Byrne.
Well, welcome to the show, Emma. I'm so excited to have you here and have a bunch of great questions to help us dig into what's going on in your world.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely. So I like to do a little regression therapy in the very beginning and take you back to your childhood. And so
yeah.
what's a story from your childhood that you feel was instrumental in, just developing in you into who you are today?
Actually, I have two short stories, and they both have a similar theme about I was a kid, and it had to do with dinner. So the first one was I was 4 years old, approximately. I wasn't yet in like grade school, but mom and dad had some type of a evening event, like a date or a dinner, something. And me, my brother, and my sister, we went we had dinner with the neighbors while mom and dad did this event. And my parents are Filipino immigrants. And this was the first time we'd ever been to an American family for dinner. And I remember sitting at the table, I'm like 4 years old, and I'm looking around and watching the mom set the table. And they had two kids that were around the same age as me and my sister. So they weren't yet in school either. But the mom was setting the table. Dad was getting the milk out, and what was going on in my mind was that there were two boxes of milk, and that the food was different. And when it came to eating, after everything was set, I'm looking at the place setting, and I'm thinking, where's the spoon? Because there was a knife and there was a fork, there was no spoon. And I'm looking around the food when they're passing it around, and I'm thinking, where's the rice? And so that kind of leads into just my confusion, because my expectations were set in what I was used to in my own home for dinner, having Filipino parents. We always had rice. We didn't have bread and potatoes very often. The two boxes of milk was confusing to me, but one was like whole milk and one was like 2% milk. So one for the kids and one for the adults. And we drank whole milk at home. And it wasn't a box, it was a gallon jug. And so there was just these differences. And, I'm 4 years old, so I don't know anything. And I had to observe the people eat to figure out how to eat, because I am used to eating with a fork and a spoon. So fast forward to me being around 10 years old. And again, had to do with dinner. And my dad is the one who does most of the cooking. And I remember him making something that was kind of ethnic. It was Filipino or something like that. It wasn't American. And he sets it out in front of us. And I'm like, so what's this, Dad? And he's like, it's your dinner. But we don't recognize it because it's Filipino, it's ethnic of some sort. And so I resume with but we don't know what it is. What is it? Dad's response was, it's your dinner. So third time, I say it again. Dad, we don't know what this is. What is this? And then so he turns it into a learning opportunity. He's like, okay, I'm the cook around here. I made the dinner. I'm your dad. Do you trust that I'm going to give you something that's going to make you sick? Do you trust that this is nutritious and is going to taste good because I'm giving it to you. It's like, do you trust me? Because I'm your dad. It's like, if you don't like it, well, then you don't get to eat, because you know what this is? It's your dinner. But both of those experiences from when I was a kid kind of just illustrates that, people are different in their expectations, and there are different ways for you to learn. You can learn through observation. You can learn by being told something. You can learn by research and education. You can live and learn, or you can learn through the trust in others. And so the work that I do is, in transition, and a lot of it is just your expectations, what you know, where you've been. That's the basis of what you believe and your behaviors and what you do. But if it's misplaced for the environment that you're in, there's going to be confusion, or there may be unmet expectations. So how do you approach resolving those issues of not knowing something? There's different ways to do it.
That's a great application of those stories. So you're going through childhood, going through school. At what point did you decide that, hey, I'm going to join the military?
Okay. So my parents were both immigrants. Mom was a RN, and my dad was a factory worker. They both immigrated to the U.S. already college educated, but they were seeking opportunities to kind of grow in the work that they had, or maybe they were pursuing a different objective in their career, but basically what they were wanting to do was make some money and be able to send some of it home to their family. So they came to the U.S. on work visas, and so they're middle income workers. Mom as an RN, my dad as a factory worker. He worked for John Deere Harvester, but there was three of us in the family who all wanted to go to college. My brother's a year older than me. I'm in the middle, and my sister is a year younger than me. And so we all had intentions of going to college, but 1, 2, 3 all in a row was going to be very difficult for the family to support. So we were all smart kids because we grew up with the value of education. You got to be smart. You got to work hard. You can do whatever you want, but you got to be smart and you got to work hard. So when it came to college, Mom and Dad didn't tell us we needed to go. We just grew up with the intention that we would. But how do we go? Right. And they didn't know a whole lot about, different opportunities other than scholarships. Right. We were all smart kids. And they're like, they were like, we want to support you in wherever you want to go to school, but you're going to have to help with it because all three of you want to go. We don't make enough as a family to pay for it all. So we looked at opportunities for scholarships. I was athletic. I was on the track team, but I wasn't good enough to get an athletic scholarship. My sister and I were both good in music, but probably not good enough to get a performance, scholarship or whatever. We were all smart. So we looked at other things other than being smart that might support us going to school. And so the military was one of those options. My brother, who's a year older than me, he actually joined the National Guard. He went into the military after just one semester of high school. So he graduated early so that he could go to boot camp, go through AIT and get all those initial entry requirements met. And then he went, to school. He went to a state school in the fall because his GI benefits were then available. I looked into opportunities to get a scholarship. And so that's how I entered into the military. I applied for an Air Force scholarship when I was a junior because I learned about it through the guidance counselor. And there was like somebody who came to the school and talked to us about that opportunity. I did not know that the other branches had ROTC scholarships like as well, but I learned about the Army having a scholarship as well the summer between my junior and senior years. So I applied for an Army ROTC scholarship. I got offers from both branches, and I, ultimately chose the Army one.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, looking back on my own career, I entered the Air Force and delayed entry, and the summer between my junior and senior year. But interestingly enough, nobody ever told me about ROTC. Nobody ever gave me any
Oh,
opportunities for college. Never knew it existed until probably a long time down the road. So
oh.
so when did you enter? And then, was it right after your senior year?
Yeah, so I was offered the Air Force scholarship. I got the letter in the fall because I had applied for it in the spring, but because I didn't apply for the Army one until the fall of my senior year, I held off making a response to the Air Force to accept or deny the scholarship. I was like, I'm going to see if I get an offer from the Army, and I did. And then I was comparing the two. Now, the reason why I was going this route was because I wanted to help the family, right? So I was looking at what's the value of the scholarship, right? And it's like, is this going to help the family as well as me, as far as me going to college? And the Air Force scholarship was a 2-year scholarship. And with any scholarship, it's awarded based on some merit or some program, right? So the Air Force scholarship was actually an offer for 2 years, and it was for nursing as the program. Now, what I wanted to do is I wanted to be a doctor. I was planning to go to pre-med. And the Army scholarship offer was a 3-year advanced designee. And basically, what that means is in your first year of college, you're not committed to you have to serve afterwards. It's kind of like a try it before you buy it, but you are a contracted cadet where you have to meet, your academic performance requirements for your major as well as the courses in ROTC. And then you can decide, do you want to continue the program or opt out for the rest? So that's what the advanced designee part was. But something I realized when I was applying for the Army scholarship was that they had programs in physical science that were what I wanted. In the Air Force application, the closest thing to becoming a doctor was nursing. There wasn't like a biology or physical sciences program that I could like check the box. So that's why it was offered in nursing. They didn't have the options that were pre-med. In the Army scholarship, there was. And so there was biology and any physical science that you could check the box. And so I was like, biology. And that's what it was offered, was a physical sciences degree, 3-year advanced designee. And when I was talking to my parents about the offers, one, I was like, well, this one pays more. It's for 3 years. I didn't quite understand the advanced designee part, but it's like just for numbers' sake, I'm 18 years old, 17 years old. And my objective was to help the family and go to school. It's like, well, this one pays more. It's longer and it's in the degree that I want. And then my dad was also saying something. I was like, yeah, and I think with the Army, I think the Air Force is more technical. It's like more machines and stuff, and you're going to be working with people. Army's all full of people. And so there's kind of this logical practicality in the decision-making process that, I'm just like a 17-year-old kid. My dad, who's super practical, is like, you want to be a doctor, you're going to be working with people. I think the Air Force is more technical. Maybe the Army is a better choice because there's more people.
Oh,
So
I
I
love it.
went the Army route for a couple reasons. Some of them practical, some of them just kind of naive. But that's how it ended up.
So then you went into the Army, but you went into college at the same time because it
Yeah,
was
I was an
ROTC.
ROTC contracted cadet because I was going to school on a scholarship. So I had an obligation to serve after I finished my degree because of that scholarship.
And then how long were you in the Army altogether?
17 and a half years and some change. My
Oh man.
intentions were actually to serve till retirement. My intentions at the
Yeah.
beginning was I need to help the family as much as I can so I can go to college and be a doctor and all this. I didn't end up becoming a doctor. I do have a biology degree, but I changed my mind along the way. That's another story. But it's something to where my obligation to fulfill my requirement for having gone to school on our scholarship was 4 years of active duty if I went active duty, but altogether an 8-year commitment to serve. So the after I served 4 years on active duty, I was liking what I was doing as I was a captain at this point, and I was like, I like this. I'm going to keep doing this. And I don't have no reason to not do this anymore. I have a total of 8 years of service. I'll just stay on active duty. Right. And well, that was what happened until I was kind of denied the opportunity to continue serving to 20 because of the downsizing that happened. It was around 2010 when the downsize started, but a lot of us in the field didn't realize what a downsize would do for career opportunities. At this point, I'm looking at getting promoted to lieutenant colonel, and I've been a successful, chemical officer for my entire career. I even had a couple commands, and that's not frequent for a chemical officer to have more than one. And my commands were in force comm. So, so an operational environment versus training and doctrine or recruiting. A lot of chemical officers do their command time in training and doctrine, or in recruiting. Force comm is the field units in the field that are getting, deployed and whatnot. And I had two commands in force comm. So I was like, I'm doing well. And well, the downsize affected my opportunities unbeknownst to me. And that's the reason why I retired early as a major with 17 and a half years versus my intention of 20 plus as a lieutenant colonel. But it all kind of translates into part of the reason why I do the work that I do. I wasn't ready. And that unexpected end to my military career and my expectations for what I thought I understood for how to be successful, it's part of the transition puzzle paradigm that I now use as part of my process when I help people kind of understand where are you in your transition process, and is part of the problem your headspace, or what are you thinking about of who you are and what you're about, or is it this space that you're showing up in and how you are delivering on your expectations, and are your expectations getting met? And for me, it was that space awareness part of the puzzle where I was unprepared, and to my peril, I wasn't ready. And so now I help people with the whole transition process. Where are you? And is it partly your fault, or is it things that you can't control?
So you're getting out of the military. What on earth made you decide that you were going to become an entrepreneur?
Okay. So one of the things I realized when I finally realized that, okay, trying to explain what happened as far as not getting selected and how the heck did I get to that point in my reality when I've been successful, the whole kind of trying to explain it was it was irrelevant, and it didn't really matter because I didn't know. How was I supposed to know? And my sister actually got me to start focusing on what was important, which was what was in front of me, what's in the future, versus trying to explain things that were in the past, which I really still don't know exactly why. But the way that she did it, the way she kind of snapped me out of it, was she was like, when I was explaining to her what not getting selected for promotion for 2 times in a row meant, she's like, Emma, it had nothing to do with you. You're trying to figure out why it happened, and the shoulda, woulda, coulda. Did you piss somebody off? Did you not do the right things? Did you this, that, or the next thing? It doesn't matter. The system changed. You got laid off. And when she explained it that way, I was like, oh my gosh. And I realized she was right. But then when I started looking at what's in my future, instead of trying to figure out what's in the rearview mirror, I was like, oh my gosh, I have no plan. I have less than 6 months, ready or not, here I come. What is that going to be? And I understood that in order to get to any opportunity, you got to know people. And I didn't know anyone. Right. And so whether I went into the private sector or if I went into entrepreneurship or anything else, it was going to be a challenge regardless, because I didn't know anyone. The people that I knew, they were military. They're here, there, wherever they were. And if they were people who were already out, I didn't know what anybody was doing. Right. And I also realized after I was on transition leave, I'd signed out of the unit. I was on my last, 90 days on active duty, or whatever. I was on my DA 31, or whatever you call it now, if that's still what it is as far as the leave form. But I had been back from overseas because I ended my career overseas, came back to the United States. After 3 or 4 weeks of being back in the United States, the government shut down. We had sequestration in October of that year. And so the downsizing of the military, there was sequestration in October, contracts and everything were getting non-renewed or canceled or whatever. And I was just like, okay, working for the government is not a good idea. And so I don't know anybody. And so going into entrepreneurship to me seemed less risky because what I intended to do was to take an opportunity that already had a business model. I wasn't going to do like a scratch, startup company, which is what Toops Consulting is. But I didn't go into a startup per se in my first venture, right? I was a 1099 contractor and I was building a farmer's agency. So I went into insurance. And part of going into insurance was in just assessing my skill sets for translatability, right? It's like, okay, so what did I used to do for the Army and super good at? I've been doing it for however long. How do I translate, those technical skills, those soft skills? I'm a leader. I've been in command. I know how to run a small organization. And one of my commands was a headquarters. So the staff functions and just kind of the herding cats kind of environment of a headquarters command. I that was one of my commands. And so it's like, I can lead an organization. I can run an agency, and so it was actually advice from a friend of my husband's who'd been in financial services for a long time. And he stated that, well, if you're going to go into the financial services industry, you can be an entrepreneur, you can be a producer. There's a lot of different, opportunities in financial services. But if you're going to be an entrepreneur, if you're going to run your own agency, align yourself with a big name that people already recognize, because nobody knows you, but they recognize Farmers or Edward Jones, right? Or, name a big financial services company, right? If you want to be a financial advisor, if you want to be an insurance agency, right now, nobody knows you, but align yourself with a brand that people do. And then when you build your business, then people do business with you because of you and the big brand name, right? But when you're first starting out, nobody knows you. So that was how I got into my first business. Was I figured
Got it.
financial services or being an insurance agency, because what I did in the military was all about risk mitigation. It was a very
Ah,
specific it was a very specific risk mitigation for unconventional risk that are invisible in the environment. So I was a chemical officer. So CBRN, chemicals, biologicals, radiation, and nuclear, energy. Those are the invisible risks that my expertise was focused on. And I explain it to folks who don't have military background that conventional risk is what most people associate as far as the military. Okay, these conventional risks are easy to see. They're hard, they're loud, they're noisy. There's a projectile and it does damage to people and things. And that's what conventional risk is. And that's what most people who are on a planning team are focused on. The bullets, the rockets, the cannons, all those loud and noisy things that destroy things, right? But other people have to look at the things that are also in the environment that are invisible. That's me. That's the folks who are the medical folks, right? There's folks who are our maneuver support. They're looking at those things that can get in the way of the conventional forces being able to do what they do. We're actually called the protection branches. So the air defense, the engineers, the military police, the chemical corps, these are all called protection branches because what we do is we enable the maneuver to do what they do, which is maneuver, right? But there are these things that can get in the way. Those things that can get in the way can make, for me, things can make you sick, right?
yeah.
There are obstacles and landmines. There's people on the battlefield who shouldn't be there. There's outlaws and, traffic ways, so all these other branches are supporting the ability of the conventional forces to do their thing. And that was what my business was, okay, what's invisible that can hurt people, can make you sick, can make you have to put on protective gear that'll compromise your communications, your ability to move or whatnot. And it was like, risk analysis, risk mitigation, it's all about training and communicating it well so that people make the right decisions for how much risk do they want to take. I was like, okay, well, that's insurance. And so that's how I got into insurance and financial advising. It's a different type of risk mitigation. It has to do with money. And it's like, well, I could do that too, but it ended up to be where insurance was kind of a really good lateral shift for the skills that I already had. And being able to take something that's really scary and people are uncomfortable discussing, like life and, a destruction of your home from a fire or an accident where you hurt somebody or your, material possession gets destroyed. Those are uncomfortable conversations to have, but to mitigate risk, you got to be able to communicate it well. And well, in my business, chemicals and radiology and things that could hurt you, kill you unconventional, like those are scary things. But I could communicate these things about scary stuff that people don't want to think about or even consider so that they can make a decision that will help protect them. So,
Got it. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
So then here you are happily running an insurance agency. What?
How
There's
did I
another
shift into
transition.
what I do now? Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So in our household, I was the active duty service person and my husband was the military spouse. A lot of folks, will assume that we were dual military because a lot of the time that's what you'll see when the woman is on active duty. And a lot of time also because you meet each other at work. But I knew David before I finished college. I met him when I was a college student. So it was a little bit unconventional as far as our relationship, but the challenges of transition for us, we both were not ready. We both were going through those challenges of what's next after the military. We don't have a plan. Well, we sort of did, but we didn't have time to develop it because we had to execute 2.5, 3 years sooner than we thought this was going to happen. But David's technical expertise is in computer science. And because of being a military spouse, he wasn't continuously employed throughout my career. It just kind of depended on where we were, if there were opportunities for him to do his work as computer science professional. He was a computer programmer. He does software development. So he was having challenges just finding an opportunity in corporate America. He had 2 master's degrees. One of them was in information management. The other one had to do with business and business and some information security or something like that. But he was having problems getting opportunities, and part of it was the gaps in his employment. And I was building, my insurance agency. It was a scratch agency. I was building a book of business. I was doing a lot of networking, and through our experiences in this first year out of the Army, I'm building the business, I'm meeting a lot of people, and I'm getting exposed to this perpetual gap between folks who have familiarity with the military culture and people and folks who don't. And so I'm learning a lot of things about business because I'm meeting people who are civilians, right? And every time that I would meet somebody new, this kind of gap of understanding, there would be some gap of understanding because I'm explaining them, where am I coming from? I used to be in the Army, now I'm in insurance and blah, blah, blah. So all of that would always come up. But anytime there was confusion, either on my part or their part, for understanding me and some of my background in the military, if it was the military information that was the gap, I bridged that gap and I would explain it. If it was something where I was confused to something that was business or they were using language I didn't understand, I would out my ignorance and say, I don't understand what you're saying. And they would explain it. So there was a bridge and that was being built with me either asking the right questions or realizing someone didn't understand, and I would bridge it. So that over time, I kept seeing it for like 10 months. I was like, every time I meet someone, there is this bridging of this gap between the fact that I have military experience and I'm using language or behaviors that they don't understand, or they have business concepts or language that I don't understand. So it's this perpetual culture difference between folks who have served and the business community. And I was seeing it for 10 months to varying degrees. And my husband, he had an opportunity for a while with a friend from high school, but then when that opportunity ended, he was having these struggles with an opportunity, and he was even working with a technical recruiter. And I remember one day I was asking him how things were going with that, because he'd been working with this technical recruiter for a few weeks already, and he wasn't getting pitched as like an ideal candidate. And I was wondering why. And it's like, what's going on? And David explained it to me. He's like, computer programming is a language. When you think in that way, you can pick up new languages very easily. It's just like if you know the Latin languages of this or that, you can pick up another Latin kind of based language pretty easily. So folks who speak Spanish can usually pick up French and Italian pretty easily because they're kind of got the same rules. Well, computer programming, like a language, changes over time. And there's these skills tests that they're having me do, and I'm not scoring in a 90 percentile, and that's what they want me to be scoring in order to be pitched as an ideal candidate. And I'm like, for one, I was really surprised at that high of a percentage, because most certifications you pass with a 70%, because that's what I had to do to get my licenses in insurance. And I was like, wow, that's really high. And I was like, well, how are you scoring? It's like 85, 87. I was like, those are really good scores. And I was like confused. And he's explaining me this. And it's like, but languages change, and so do computer languages. And so there's this thing called syntax, like punctuation. And because I haven't been doing it in a while, my punctuation's wrong. And I'm not scoring in a 90 percentile because I'm not used to the
Mm.
new language, how it has changed in the 10 years or 12, 15 years since I really was doing it all the time. But just like with anyone who has lost a little bit of fluency, you get back in it immersed and you pick it back up really, really quick. But he's not getting these opportunities, and he was frustrated, and he was explaining to me, he's like, if I can't get picked up, what, based on my resume, because of these gaps of employment that aren't inherently obvious, that I'm a military spouse, and I'm not getting pitched by a technical recruiter because of this dang skills test, that I'm missing it because I don't know what the syntax changes are, then I should just work for myself and be a consultant. And he says it in frustration. He's like, and by this time, I'm already realizing that there's this perpetual gap between the communities of the military service person and the business, and that I was bridging it, and it's education. My response to him is like, why don't we? And he's like, what? And he was like, what? Because he's just venting and just frustrated.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I explained it to him. I was like, David, I've been networking for like 10 months. And I keep seeing this with everyone I meet. It's education. It's me outing my ignorance, or I'm helping them understand something because I see that they are confused. But it's a bridge that is being built by education. And David was so frustrated. He was like, what? And I'm like, why don't we start a business, a consulting business? Because we're both good at school. David actually went to school on a scholarship. It was an athletic scholarship, but David's also very smart. And we both have patience and have had experience with tutoring when we were students, and with people when we have expertise that they don't have. We're good at explaining things to folks who don't understand it as well as we do. And so we're like, we could do this. It's education. So let's do a business, right? And so I let the folks at Farmers, my district manager, he actually has said something that also encouraged the idea, because Farmers had some marketing campaign that they were doing to where they wanted to get more military experience talent to come in as new producers or new business owners, new agency owners. And my district manager had said something about how, people will pay for expertise. They'll pay for speed, and you being an agency owner now with military experience, there may be businesses out there who want to do better in attracting military talent. There's people who will pay for that kind of service. And because of that, I was like, And so that was kind of what it was. We started the business in December of 2014. I'd been out of the Army for about a year. And that's what we've been doing as our business ever since, is Toops Consulting.
So then what makes Toops Consulting special?
Well, I think when you do a startup business that's based on knowledge, that you got to be confident in your abilities to serve to that expectation. We set up the business with the name Toops Consulting because the idea that we had when we started it was that David would be consulting in computer science and information technology type stuff, because that was his wheelhouse. That I would be doing consulting that was focused on my understanding of the military culture and people, right? So I'd be helping folks with recruiting and military programs and strategies and things like this. That was my idea. And we set up the business with actually 3 segments. Personal professional development, because we're teachers, we can help folks understand, the different subjects that are just the typical in school, science and math and social studies, all those different things. We could do that. But then these consulting segments where we thought we were going to be spending the most time. But we realized over time that the marketing of our consulting was difficult because David is introvert. He doesn't do a lot of marketing. I'm the one who does it. And it was confusing to people as far as what is it that you guys do? So I think what's unique is, one, you got to believe in what you are delivering. You have to have credibility, even if people don't know you, right? Because nobody knew us, but we were like, we're good at this, this, and this. Create the company in these with these segments in mind. But over time, we lived and learned as far as which segment should we really be focused in. And so now we focus not just on consulting, but those are really kind of the ones that we only do by referral. What we focus on now is personal and professional development, because one, it's more ubiquitous as far as people needing it and wanting it and understanding what it's about. And when I market it, it's not confusing as far as who's delivering the service. We both are.
Got it. Okay. So then, switching gears just slightly, who are some key influences or mentors that kind of helped you along the way to getting to where you're at now?
I vaguely mentioned one earlier, and that was David's high school classmate. But if you rewind a little bit, when I was a second lieutenant, I got introduced to John C. Maxwell as a business author. And so as a brand new second lieutenant, I read his book of the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And then, of course, the career in the military is all about leadership at different levels, right? They're going to have plenty of opportunities to learn and exercise leadership abilities. But after I got out, I got introduced to Napoleon Hill through a coach. And a couple things out of Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich, was this idea of infinite intelligence and masterminds. And so this is kind of like a woo-woo type of thing. Some people can't get their head wrapped around it because you kind of have to have faith that there is something bigger, that there's a universe, that there's an energy or there's whatever. But in the book, he calls it the infinite intelligence, and that everybody has access to it. But it's like it's energy. But those two business authors and some of the ideas that they had in these two books really helped me as far as kind of understanding where do I fit as far as this being in the knowledge business, right? I'm in the knowledge business. And another one that I got introduced to is was a guy named Dean Graziosi, and he one of his key value props when he talks and when he trains is that the underdog advantage is that people don't expect a lot when you're the underdog, right? You don't have a reputation. Nobody knows you. You have this underdog advantage because there's no expectation that you are needing to try to meet because they don't have one for you. And he also had one that had to do with your mess becomes your message. And so these three business authors all got introduced to me at different points in my life. But I think a lot of what resonates with them is how I now kind of conduct myself in my business. But I've met a lot of folks along the way. I've had some informal coaches. I've had ones that I have paid, right? That are intentionally working with me. But a lot of it has been a combination of headspace and space awareness, which is what my transition puzzle paradigm is all about. It's like, where is the problem in your steps to proceed or get closer to what it is that you are trying to achieve? Is it you getting in your own way because your headspace is wrong? You have set limits to what you are considering as information that is going to get you there. You don't know enough, and you have closed off your ability to progress because you're not growing in your information, what you know. Maybe what you're realizing is you're not necessarily in your own way, but in the space that you are in, there are barriers because there's access that you don't have. There's a closed door. There is an expert that you need and you don't know enough, but that person does. So there's different things that could be in your way. And along, the last 10 years since I've been out, I've been realizing kind of where do I have control and where do I not? And that's the key. The transition puzzle paradigm is you have to acknowledge and understand what you can or cannot control the stuff you can, but influence the rest. If you don't have the capabilities, then can you gain them? How much time is it going to take? If you don't want to spend the time and expense to gain them, then align yourself with the resources and the people who can accelerate and get that next step taken. Other things that I've realized as far as to the question, as far as key influences or mentors, is earlier I was talking about how when I was a kid, I realized that there are different ways to learn. You can do it by live and learn and come away with your own interpretation and lesson as far as what that meant. You can observe it and interpret it based on your own ideas of what did that mean. You could have someone tell you. You can do research and education, or you can have someone that you trust tell you, and you trust them even if you don't understand it all, right? And so I think it's a combination of all those things that over time I know to turn to when I'm stuck. Because you acknowledge what you can and you cannot control. There's a whole lot that you can't. And so what is it that you need to do? And that's the key. You got to do in order to get that next step and not get stuck.
I like that. So as we start to wrap things up today, when you look back on your entrepreneurial journey, what would you say has been one of the most valuable lessons that you've learned?
Yeah. I think that people need to be objective. They need to have confidence, right? But they also need to have the lid open to accept that maybe and probably always there's something else to know or learn. And that even if they're the expert in something, there could be a different way to do it, that there could be a different perspective on something that you already know. And I think that if you do not leave that opening, that you're not objective to consider a new idea, that you're not a lifelong learner, right? That you will get stuck, because what basically what that means is you haven't lived what you need to. You don't know what you need to in order to not be stuck. If you are stuck, it's because there's something missing. So what is it that's missing? And can you help it yourself? Or do you need to add something, someone, some access, something in order to not be stuck? So I think that's kind of the thing. With my business, it's interesting because it seemed like for every single year that I was out of the Army, it seemed like the next year I was onto something different or slightly different than what I had already been doing. And I'd done some nonprofit work. I was a chapter leader here in Kansas City for the AUSA chapter. That's the Association of the United States Army. So I did that for a long time. Did 2 terms, was chapter president. It was a volunteer thing, and I was doing my business. And I've started some different programs with some organizations in town. There's a Purple Connection that I launched with some folks, with like a networking group that kind of supported the military transitioner. There's the American Warriors interest group that I started over at the ACA Business Club. There's my business. There's this transition paradigm thing that I really started to use in my marketing and language as far as describing what it is that I do. I have a strengths profile certification now, but it's all not completely off track of the purpose that I have, right? It's a slight variance to the lane. It's kind of like when you're in the military, you're expected to stay in your lane, but you have this left and right limit as far as how much wiggle room you have to adjust, right? You don't want to get in the way of the next person over because they got their excellence that they got to be awesome at, right? So you got your piece to be expert and excellent in, but you got a little bit of wiggle room as far as your left and right limits. But when you are executing, you got to know what your lane and limits are, but you also need to know what the next couple levels above you are doing, because it's a nested plan. Well, I think in business it's the same way. You need to be able to know who you are, what you're awesome at, what's your competitive advantage, why you versus the next guy. You need to understand how to communicate so people understand that about you, right? You need to do your thing in your lane with a little wiggle room. You might have opportunities to partner with folks and synergize your energy, your capacity, your resources. But you also, as far as operations, you need to know when you need to pause, stop, wait for the left or right to catch up, or, do something completely different because the plan just went to shit, right? It don't work anymore, and just come up with something else. Right. But all of those things, it's funny because they're all kind of lessons that I learned in the military, but now they have a different context. But it's in self-identification and space awareness. It ties to the transition puzzle paradigm that is what I kind of have as the premise for my work. And if what you want and you know what it is whatever that is, how are you getting there? You need to acknowledge the strategic framework of self and space, but then everything in the middle can be very chaotic, and that's okay because that's where life happens. You don't always know what you're going to encounter, but you have to encounter them. But when you do, you make a decision. Where does this fit? Do you not yet know? And if there are things that you can delegate to people who know, it's like there's this whole segment of your puzzle that's like, you know what? That person's awesome and brilliant at that. I'm going to just delegate and they can manage that part of the puzzle because I trust them, right? Mm-hmm. Some of it you don't have to do yourself. I think a lot of folks maybe kind of get in their own way because they think that.
Yeah, absolutely. This was a fantastic interview. Thank you so much for this. What is the best way for people to find out more about you and what you're doing?
A couple ways to find me online. My LinkedIn profile. So Emma Toops on LinkedIn, if you are part of that business social network. And then my website, toopsconsulting.com. has some information about what it is that we do. We have several segments that we support as far as students and adults who are in transition. That's who we primarily focus on, are students for academic and career development planning, folks who are already in the workforce, and if maybe they want to do a shift, get promoted, or just shift into a whole different environment. And of course, my affinity with people who are coming out of the military and entrepreneurs. So those are all kind of pillars that people can learn a little bit more about on our website, so toopsconsulting.com. And then if you want to send me an email, you can send it to emma@toopsconsulting.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm really glad you came on today.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Pivot Perspectives with your host, Chris O'Byrne. Please leave your feedback and visit strategicadvisorboard.com to get the latest and greatest business advice on the planet. Follow us on social media for updates, and we will see you on the next episode.